Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. I hope you're having a great Wednesday or whenever you're listening to today's episode. Just a reminder before we get started to leave a rating or review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you haven't. If you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, I will get you entered into a $100 grocery store gift card giveaway that I'm drawing for on my birthday, July 21st of this year. All you have to do is screenshot that review, send it my way, and I will get you entered. But if you're new here, hello, I'm Bailey. I'm a holistic health and nutrition coach who really focuses on decreasing inflammation with women and healing their relationship with food. I use various tools like the inflammation assessment and lead most women through my one-on-one program, Nourish to Flourish, where we focus on how you can fuel your body to feel your best. And it's really just something I'm so passionate about. All of the information will be in the description of today's episode. Also, would love for you to get connected with me. My favorite part about having a podcast is getting feedback and hearing from you. So never hesitate to reach out if you need anything, have any questions for me, or would like to share something that maybe you discovered while listening to the podcast. That's really why I wanted to start this, is I just wanted to have a long form of media that I could connect with people on and really share a bulk of what I know. Of course, there's a lot more that can come from working one-on-one or doing a group program with me, but you could honestly listen to the podcast and get a good foundation of where you need to go on this health journey. I just love to be able to support women along the way, and I'm just so passionate about doing that and so passionate about what I'm able to do day to day. But all that aside, let's get into the catch-up of today's episode and do the segment of how I'm nourishing my mind, body, and spirit. I honestly don't know if I can start this episode, though, without pointing out that Justin Bieber and Hailey Bieber are expecting. And yes, this might seem a little left field for some of you. Others, you might know I have had an obsession with Justin Bieber since I was very, very little. Honestly, not so much anymore, but when I saw that, I was like, man, my childhood self really thought I would marry that man. And now he's expecting. I just feel like this is the year of pregnancy. I've been seeing so many celebrities getting pregnant. I've been hearing from so many people that they want to start trying to get pregnant. And it all just really seems to fall in at a good place for me because that's kind of what I'm deep diving into right now. I started reading the book Real Food for Fertility and have just been so fascinated by how we maybe historically have nourished our body versus how you should actually be nourishing your body to have like a healthy pregnancy, but also to increase your fertility. And that's all just something that I feel like I really started getting into earlier this spring. I don't know, just some things in my own life that led me to think, maybe I should know a little bit more about this if I want to have kids one day. I feel like having a younger brother, I learned a little bit about babies, but I was 5.5 when he was born, so it wasn't really, none of it really stuck, like I didn't know why things were happening or my mom was doing things. And I've heard that your instincts just take over. But I, being the person who really just likes to either dive all into something or has no interest in it, was like, this is probably a topic I should dive into. And regardless of if my instincts would ever kick in one day or if, I don't know, I'm sure they would. But anyway, I just like to be overly prepared for things. It's just who I am. It's probably a fault of mine at this point, but that's just how it's always been. I'm just always trying to be overly prepared. And it's just kind of how I do things. So that was just like, oh my gosh, I feel like fertility is on the mind right now. Pregnancy is on the mind. Lots of people getting pregnant or wanting to have kids soon. And it's fun to learn more about that whole process. So I had to mention that they were expecting because huge news this week. Outside of that, this weekend was Mother's Day. Also went to a wedding on Saturday, got to see some of my high school friends and connect with people I don't get to see all that often. So that was really, really fun. And then on Sunday, since we were already in Omaha for the wedding, we got brunch or lunch with Nate's family, and then that evening got supper with my family and my mom. So it was just a really socializing filled weekend, which all good things. It's just so draining. I am definitely an extroverted introvert. Like, I don't love to socialize, in all honesty. Like, that doesn't really do it for me. But I know how important it is, and socialization is so valuable, and I can't just not do that because there's so many things I would miss out on. So I'm really able to kind of like turn it on, be social when I need to, but it definitely does leave me feeling very drained. Like on Sunday or even yesterday evening, so I'm recording this on Tuesday, so Monday evening, we went for a walk, Nate and I, after supper, and I was just venting, and I'm like, okay, I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say, but like there's just so many things I needed to get out, and I feel like it's just because I was exhausted. And I also discovered that I have this horrible curse of never being able to not, how do I say this? Like, evaluate food consumption of the people around me. And before you think, oh my gosh, like you're so judgy, I don't know you're judging what I'm eating. I am not in any way judging what people are eating. It's not ever stemming from a place of judgment. Hear me out on that. But what I've noticed is that because I know so much about food and I know so much about what's in food, that's not meaning I view food as something that needs to be restricted, but when eating with other people and they're telling me about a health issue they have or a health concern they have, and then I see how they fill their plate, it just makes me want to be like, oh my gosh, like I want to tell you what you could be eating to properly fuel your body and what would make you feel so much better. But at the same time, like they're not asking for my advice, like people, I've realized. And this is something that I've had to kind of develop a lot of empathy in my heart, but also kind of a dissociation with it, because a lot of people like to dump a lot of things on me, like health concern wise or stresses or mostly health related issues. Like I get a lot of people's health issues brought up to me, either through just talking to them, social media that has created like a lack of a boundary, or just leading like exercise class or having people come talk to me. And I don't mind it. Like I really don't mind that at all. And if you've ever done that, I don't want you to think I'm talking about you or something. Like I can't even give you a specific name. It's just like that general feeling of I get a lot of things just like dumped on me. And being able to handle that can be really difficult when I know that this person isn't necessarily asking for advice. They just need somebody to dump it on. And I think that's created a really weird kind of boundary for me, because I have to emotionally invest a lot of myself into the clients that I work with one-on-one or in group settings. Like that is what a lot of my energy goes towards, not to mention my family and friends that I'm sure I've got a ton of friends. I definitely don't check in with them as much as I should, because I feel like I have a lot of my emotional capacity is just like invested in other people that invest in me, and it's like that mutual relationship, right? And that is where like my energy kind of has to go, like either you're investing your time into me or your finances into me with one-on-one or group coaching, or you're like my friend or family member where like I want to hear what's going on in your life, but it's really hard to like have that boundary. So anyway, I've realized this weekend that when I see things like that, it's really, really hard because people like to dump, but they don't like to receive feedback all the time. And I want to provide feedback because I think it would be helpful for them, and it would also make me feel better about the interaction. But I also know they're not asking for it. So that is like a very complicated situation I've been finding myself in recently. And it's something where it makes it really, really hard for me to escape work because I can almost never stop thinking about it. I was talking to Nate actually on our drive, and I was like, I need to put this in like your terms. So say like he's an accountant. I'm like, say you see somebody on the street, or you go out and have supper with somebody and you sit with them, and on their forehead, you can see all of the financial issues that they're having and how they're not managing their money correctly. And all you have to do is you have to sit there and just look at that struggle that they're in, but never make a comment about it because they're not asking. They're rather just dumping it on you. And he's like, well, I know, but I don't have to deal with that. I'm like, I know, but I do. And so it's just hard. And it's something I definitely know I'm lacking a balance in. I'm definitely lacking that work-life balance because I almost feel like I can't even escape that. And again, this isn't to make anybody feel bad if they've ever done that to someone or to me. Like, this isn't a guilting thing. It's just something that I know I have to be more in control of, which is just a difficult boundary to set. So that's just something I'm actively focusing on. And I feel like that's where a lot of my energy when nourishing, like my mind and my spirit, has gone to this last week, is just like almost dwelling on it, but not really having a solution. So that is kind of like a big bulk of where I feel like my headspace is at right now. And again, that's not to dump all of that on you, because I'm not asking for you to help me find a solution, but if you had one, be very, very appreciated, because it's just really hard to escape that sometimes. But how I'm trying to nourish my mind right now is spending time outside and going on evening walks, which is something I definitely could admit I haven't done enough of. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I lead 3 exercise classes. And so when I get home in the evening after that, I'm pretty pooped. But I also was like, you know what? My husband doesn't get to work out 3 times on those days of the week. So I still need to make it a priority to go for a short walk with him. I really value that time and enjoy that time. So just doing more of that is definitely continuously going to be a goal of mine this spring and summer. And then how I'm nourishing my body is resting when I need to. Like I'd mentioned, I feel like there's a lot of like emotional stress right now, which ironically we're going to be talking about today. And, understanding your emotions. But I am really, really trying hard to rest when my body signals that it needs it. And with my Mondays and Wednesdays being pretty packed, I also understand that on those days when I'm working from 5:45 a.m. to about 6:30 p.m., I have to make sure that I am resting on those mornings. So this has only happened once, but from 8 to 8:45, I'll come home in the morning and take a quick power nap, and then I'm good to go for the day. And I don't think that's probably the best way for me to maybe manage that rest like that. But it's also something that I'm trying to not have guilt around, because I've struggled with properly resting for a very, very long time. So in my mind, it's like any amount of rest that I'm giving myself should be valued and kind of approached with no judgment. And so that's what I have kind of found on those days is working for me. Again, that's only been a couple times, but I started morning exercise classes. This is now on I think we're on week 2. Anyway, time goes so fast, but yeah, just understanding, okay, Bailey, you don't really let yourself rest that often. When you are allowing that for yourself and really noticing you need it, you need to recognize that. And so trying to be so much better about that. And then how I'm nourishing my spirit is to try to not be on my cell phone until 8 a.m. or at least not on social media. That is something that will just take my day from feeling so good and awesome and productive to down the pooper. And so I'm no, I need to set a firm boundary around that and identify when I can wait to get on my phone. So for me, 8 a.m. is pretty easy, but I wake up early and exercise. So 8 a.m. is the goal for me. And then making sure I do my Bible study before that. I realized too, if I'm on my phone early in the morning, it creates that instant addictiveness where I'm checking social media maybe once every hour, which is, I hate, I really don't like that. And so that's where again, I know there's a boundary there that needs to be set. So I'm really trying to set that. Okay, so today we are talking about mindset matters, not to just jump into things, but also I want to just get into it because we're talking about how you can evaluate stress in your life and understand your emotions in a holistic approach. This is actually a clip from, I'm recording it in real time, but I just did this presentation today for the Rise coaching group that I lead in Lincoln. If you are in the area close to me, that is definitely something you should check out. I'm only leading one session this year, but next year I'm hoping to lead a couple. And I'm actually hoping to lead in-person workshops with this program I've developed. It is something I've not announced. I don't have specifics on, but I would love to know if there'd be interest in having more local gals get together and go through this program because I've put a lot of energy into it. And like anything, I say that all the time, but I really, really try to be so intentional with what I lead people through. Of course, I have one-on-one coaching. I have my group coaching, Inflame to Inspired, which will be launching again in June, but that is all virtual. And so Mindset Matters is this group, and we talk about things that I really don't talk about on either of those other sessions. Like the things we talk about in Mindset Matters maybe comes up through one-on-one coaching, but it by no means was covered at all in Inflame to Inspired. It's kind of a new set of information, only focusing on the brain and the systems affected by stress, by inflammation, and touching a little bit on that food piece. Not even a little bit. We will dive into the food piece, but in a different approach than I've ever really done. So I think having an in-person experience would be really amazing. And I know my goal this year is to really connect more in person and lead more workshops. And I have yet to do that. We're halfway through the year. So it's just something I'm actively thinking about. So I wanted to give you a little blurb of this session and kind of guide you through what I led these women through today to see if it's something that you would ever find interest in, but most importantly, just for you to feel like you're gaining value from this conversation, which is my goal every time I record a podcast episode. Is I want you to leave feeling encouraged and inspired. I probably say that at almost every end of the episode, is I want you to feel encouraged and inspired, because I truly do. And I know there are so many sources out there that require no investment, but I always just like to be very transparent. You always hear things first on the podcast. This is like the group of gals that and men, I know there's guys that listen, but that I really just share the most with, and you get kind of premature details on everything happening, just because I think I want this to feel kind of like a collaboration, kind of take you along on the whole journey of doing most things with me. So with that, let's dive into today's episode. So we're talking about evaluating stressors, understanding your emotions. So we first have to kind of discuss, how does emotional stress impact inflammation? And there's this diagram that it's from the book Ancient Remedies by Dr. Josh Axe. And it's this tree. And at the top of the tree, you have the symptoms. So like when the branches come out and there's leaves, those are your symptoms. But then there's the ground, and beneath that, there are all these roots. Okay, so that root system. And that below there is called the root cause. And a lot of holistic health coaches talk about discovering the root cause and how valuable that is. And I think it's become such a saturated term that people are like, yeah, sure, whatever. But it is truly identifying what's going on internally and not just looking at it from, okay, you've got a symptom, here's your one diagnosis. We look at, okay, here's your primary area where that symptom is stemming from. Here are all of the things that we can focus on, mind, body, and spirit included. And so we're focusing mostly on stress today. I talk a lot about stress on this podcast because I think there's so much complexity to it that we really just don't know. And when you think about it, yes, people are probably talking about stress, but how often are you actively working on practices to manage stress? I know for me, it's not nearly enough, even though I feel like I've established a lot of really healthy habits. There's still so many things I could work on. So you're actually going to leave today's session with 3 action plans to help minimize stress for this week and the week ahead. But kind of coming back to that root cause approach, when we look at stress is one of the roots coming out of the tree, but I really think it affects all of them. So I wish you could see this visual diagram, but included here is stress, an unhealthy diet, negative emotions, poor sleep, inactivity, toxins, trauma, and genetics. And of course, stress is kind of a piece of that tree, but stress actually affects all of those other areas. If you think about an unhealthy diet, right? If you are so busy and so overwhelmed with life, you probably are going to grab what is convenient to you, which typically isn't always the best option. Same with negative emotions. Stress brings out negative emotions in people, so that those mood swings, irritability, a huge side effect of stress. Poor sleep, again, with stress, can lead to dysregulated cortisol, which cortisol should be elevated in the morning, it should come down, and then melatonin should be produced around the evening time just so your body is then prepared for sleep. So if you're stressed, again, cortisol can be dysregulated. You might notice you have a hard time falling asleep. Moving to inactivity, again, if your schedule is so packed and you're so overwhelmed with what's going on, it'll probably be a lot harder for you to move your body and exercise or find time to do that. Toxins, stress can be stored in various areas of your body, which can then be released as toxins into your bloodstream. Trauma, so much stress comes from trauma, right? If you think of childhood trauma, the amount of long-term stress that can have on your body is so significant, along with the stress it can have on your reproductive organs. If it was like a sexual trauma or sexual assault trauma or childhood abuse trauma, that can really impact how your body then responds into adulthood. And then genetics, right? If you think about, and I gave this example today, if you think about dogs, which yes, I'm going to use dogs as my example. If you think about a household where they have a dog, most often if you are just sitting at your desk working and you're relaxing on the couch, your dog is going to curl up beside you, maybe by your feet and rest. But if you notice you get up and you're moving around and you're jumping around and dancing and singing and talking, your dog starts to get very energetic and wound up, and then their tail starts wagging and they start running around and wanting to play fetch. I would say that's how my dog Luna is all the time. And so if you think about that environment, right? If you grew up in an environment where you had a lot of activity, you might naturally have elevated stress levels, and that would be hereditary, maybe not necessarily genetic. But I would say some of that personality would be genetic. So maybe it's genetic as well. And then if you grew up in a house that was more calm and very relaxed, you might be a little easygoing too. And those stressors don't impact you as much. And it's just really fascinating, even thinking about pregnancy. The stress that a mother is under when she's pregnant can impact the stress of the child, right? So when we think about like eating disorders or disordered eating habits, if the mother is having that while she's pregnant and she's having all of those thoughts, that can actually be translated or show up in that child because she was in the womb. And that actually becomes genetic, like a genetic predisposition to have a eating disorder or disordered eating habits. And that's why that relationship with food piece is so valuable when also talking about stress. And so, yes, of course, there's that tree, there's all of those things coming from the roots, but stress to me just seems to be the one that really is connected to everything. And if we think about the cycle of inflammation, so when we think of the cycle of inflammation, you think about first stress. So your body either has acute or chronic stress, and that then can lead to a minor symptom. From that minor symptom, if it's not managed, it leads to a major symptom. And then from there, if that major symptom is not maybe recognized or taken care of, it can lead to chronic disease. Which is why I repeat over and over, it feels like on this podcast, that if you have something not so normal happening in your body, it is not honestly acceptable at this point to ignore it, because there's way too many resources out there for you to do something about that symptom. So for example, this is the example that I gave. Your first stress, which might be acute stress, would be leading a meeting in front of 500 or more coworkers. So the minor symptom that you might feel from that is an upset stomach, shakiness, or frequent urination. You got to go to the bathroom all the time. Okay, so if that was then a consistent part of your job, if every single day or multiple times a week you were leading meetings in front of 500 or more coworkers, you would probably start to develop a major symptom if you ignored the minor symptom and didn't find a way to manage that. Okay, so then that major symptom would be losing control over your bowel movements and having panic attacks. So you've ignored the minor symptom, you've now moved to the major symptom area. From there, again, if the major symptom is ignored and you're like, this is just a part of my life, I can't do anything about it, there's no cure, and you just tell yourself that over and over, it's going to lead to chronic disease. And that would be inflammatory bowel disease, IBD. And if you find yourself in that point of chronic disease right now, I want you to know there is no shame and you should not feel embarrassed or regretful about that, because you can go back. Although we can't go back in time, you can kind of, improve your symptoms so maybe they become just a major symptom. Then from there, you improve that symptom so it's a minor symptom. And then finally, it just becomes a random stressor that comes and goes, but it's not consistently a part of your lifestyle. So yes, if you find yourself at the point of chronic disease right now, you do not have to be there forever. So I want you to, and there's going to be some practices in here that will actually allow you to pause the video, do some journaling, but I'm not actually going to give you that much time to journal on the actual episode. This is one where if you would like, you can pause it and then actually do these mindfulness practices or write out and do these reflections. So I want you to think about what is causing you the most stress right now. So most often with what you've written down, I always say try to write down 1 to 10 things. Of course, it's going to be best case scenario if you can't think of 10, write down as many as you're experiencing. But most often, these stressors are going to fit into 4 categories. The first one being family or friendships, the second one being career, third one being financial, and then that fourth one being physical or personal stressors. So with this, we have to think of the emotional stress that comes with it, right? So if you're able to categorize those stressors, I always think like circling them, maybe kind of like combining them so you can see where a majority of your stress is coming from is very helpful, because that's going to help you identify that first area to start with. So for me, typically it is career focused stress. I would say most of my stress comes by or from my career. And that kind of seeps into personal for me because I own my own business. For some people, they can maybe turn work on and shut it off at the end of the day. For me, that's not my reality, as I've kind of expressed in the beginning of this episode. So for me with career, that's a primary stressor. I know that's where I need to put a lot of my energy into. This isn't to say you won't notice acute stress in those other areas that should just be ignored, because some things can't be ignored. I think for sure those family and friendship stressors, they can't be ignored. Sometimes you have to focus on those as well, but really find what is causing most of your stress. And that's when you know you need to be adding in some new practices to help manage that stress. So kind of coming back to emotional stress, thinking of maybe how you feel before a deadline or a speaking event. I know for me, I was headed to a networking event earlier this year, and I was like physically shaking. Like my hands were shaking and my stomach hurt and I could not stop going to the bathroom. TMI, but I think that's the reality for a lot of people. I actually sent the video to Nate. I'm like, yeah, this is not normal. And that's because I've identified that I've always put a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect, to say the perfect things, to not offend people, and to not, and I guess I don't know where this comes from, but I've always wanted to just not look pathetic. You know, like where you go into a group of people and you know absolutely no one. I think like that initial conversation starter with somebody that you've never met or you don't know, to me is so intimidating. So I'll almost put myself in that scenario before I actually experience it and freak myself out thinking the worst thoughts. So I want you to think about how your mind responds to those situations. For me, if I think back to career, I would say a negative or limiting belief that comes up often, or maybe not so much anymore, but has historically, is you are not doing enough. That's really hard to push through if you are constantly telling yourself you're not doing enough, because you're never going to be doing enough. Then think about, how does your body physically respond to stress? So do you notice a tightness in your chest, in your shoulders, in your back, an upset stomach, or that physically shaking? For me, I notice when I'm stressed, my shoulders seem to get closer and closer to my ears. And then I notice, wow, my shoulders are really tight. I need a massage at the end of the day. Or my neck is really tight. And that's kind of where I've noticed my body holds stress. Okay. It's also cool to think about where your body holds stress and what that can symbolize. So for me, to have that tightness and tension in my shoulders when stressed would tell me, okay, you feel other people's, like you bear a lot of weight from other people and you feel like you have to do everything on your own, right? Like carrying the team. If we look at traditional Chinese medicine, that's kind of how it translates to, is like, okay, you are just carrying the load of other people. And again, you feel like you're carrying the load of the people around you, that you're carrying the load for your team. Like I had said before, I think that might be the best way to describe it. So then, yeah, like my shoulders just feel heavy and tight, or the opposite effect, they like come up to my ears, right? My muscles are constricting to protect my body, whereas when we're not stressed, they're able to just relax. So write down both, if you have pen and paper with you, both on how your mind responds and your body responds. Because if we think about, okay, what if these symptoms lasted forever? Like we touched on before, you would start to develop those minor, major, and then those chronic disease symptoms or diagnosis. And that's just not what we want to happen. We want to be able to stop stress when it comes. So we also have to identify the difference between stress and stressors. Okay, so stress is going to be that emotional and that physical reaction that you're having. So what's really cool about this is you can decrease stress even if you can't eliminate the stressor by doing different management practices. Okay, so that's where that stressor comes in. So stressors are the things that bring out stress in you. What's really important to note about this is that you can eliminate your stressors, but you're still going to have elevated stress if you don't learn how to manage it, right? If you think about a deadline with school or work, there's going to be stressors that you just have to endure, right? There are going to be deadlines. There's going to be presentations you have to give that cause stress, and you have to endure it. There is no other option, really, because life is going to continue to throw stressors at you. But if you haven't learned how you personally can both recognize and manage your stress, it's going to be very hard for you to push through this phase. Okay. And that's because there's actually a cycle of stress that your body goes through. So if you think about, and again, there's this diagram I wish you could see because it's super helpful, but if you think about stress resistance, some people will have higher resistance to stress, other people will be lower. If you think about people as they age, they tend to get less resistant to stress. The smaller things seem to be a lot larger maybe than they are. And I couldn't tell you exactly why that is. I think maybe because occupational stress has disappeared. And so having stress in some way makes them feel like they have control. And that could be same for somebody younger, but I would say the younger you are, usually the more resistant you are to stress. That's kind of like when a baby is born, right? That is a whole stressful moment for the child, but they're very resilient. They're able to get through it. And whereas the mother might notice a more long-term effect of that stress on her body. Okay, so when we think about when the stress occurs in that phase 1, this is that alarm reaction. So you mobilize your resources. You look, okay, fight or flight mode. Do I need to escape the situation or do I have to handle it straight on? Okay. And you can only stay in fight or flight mode for really 20 to 60 minutes. 60 minutes would really, really be pushing it. From there, your body goes into phase 2. So on this graph, it's pretty level. You've got that dip where there's that stress that occurs, and then it starts rising and leveling out. This is that resistance phase. So phase 2. Your body's resistance to stress can only last so long before you're going to notice that phase 3 sets in, and that's exhaustion. So in this resistance phase, your body is either learning how to adapt at this higher level of stress, right? Or your body is starting to repair from the stress it experienced. And then from there, ultimately, you will reach that exhaustion phase. And this is when you have a weakened immune system and disease starts to be present. Okay, this is because your body has to reserve a lot of energy to help support other systems of your body that were very, very fatigued when you were just hanging out in that resistance phase. And one example I want to give, because this just feels the most probably relatable, is when you think about and I know this is really going to be hard to think about for some people, but if you have a death in the family, maybe a friend or family member, you're going to go through that fight or flight stage. You get the news, you've got the stages of grief, so you're going to deny it. But at some point, you're like, okay, the stress has occurred. I either need to seclude myself and let somebody else take over, or what I think most people probably recognize is, okay, this is my responsibility now. I need to take care of making arrangements. Your body then goes through that stage of resistance. You are functioning at a very, very high level of stress. You're handling grief and that sadness that comes on, but you have to keep functioning at this level because there is no other choice. Ultimately, maybe it's days, weeks, or months later, sometimes even years, you completely dip and you are just exhausted. and your body goes into hibernation, kind of it, for lack of better terms, and you have to sit and just let your body repair and take the time it needs to get enough energy to function at that like medium stress resistance level. Okay. And again, I know that might be a really hard example for some of us to think about, but I think we all probably know of somebody who's had to go through that, or maybe watch somebody else go through that. So I think it's pretty relatable to think of it in that setting, right? There is no other option. You have to be resistant to stress, but ultimately you're going to have a dip. So really my goal is to help you complete that cycle of stress. Okay, so yes, you're going to notice some exhaustion, but rather than having that complete and utter exhaustion after any stressor, we're going to implement practices that let your body know that it's safe. So these are great to do if you have a very stressful day or week, is to add in these practices so your body can function less at that resistance stage, kind of cycle through naturally that exhaustion stage, and finally feel like it's safe. So the first one is going to be progressive muscle relaxation. And you can find practices for all of this on YouTube. I'm not going to lead you through it, but what that looks like is contracting those muscles, engaging your muscles for 5 seconds, and then relaxing. So when I was working through this with the Rise group, we started with our face, scrunching up your face, holding for 5 seconds, then relaxing, waiting a little bit and doing that one more time. Then we move to our shoulders. Then we move to our arms, then our hands, then our torso or that core area, then your legs and your feet. And you're just engaging these muscles like they would probably naturally be doing as your body is physically responding to stress. You're doing it manually. Then you're letting them fully relax and experience that release of stress. Okay, deep breathing throughout this whole process is of course very helpful as well, which leads me into number 2, which is that square or boxed breathing. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can have that pen and paper and you can actually draw a square. So as that line goes up, you inhale through your nose, you hold that breath at the top, you make a line towards the right, you exhale through your mouth, line goes down, you wait or rest at the bottom, line goes back to where you started, making a square. You can draw this out, which they use in a lot of art therapy practices, or you can close your eyes and visualize making that square. Going again through this a few times, nice and slow, not putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do it quickly or rush through it. The third is going to be a creative project. So the creative project I led them through was writing out 3 things that you're grateful for and leaving some space beside each one for you to doodle about that thing that you're grateful for. Okay, so for example, like if I put Luna laying underneath my desk while I'm working, something I'm grateful for because it just makes me feel like I'm not alone, I would actually draw that depiction of or description of what I talked about, and then I would move to the next one and kind of doodle that out. And this is a whole process of just not putting pressure on yourself to draw it perfectly. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm just not creative, I couldn't do that. And I think everybody's creative. It just depends, it just depends on the person. Like everybody's going to find ways to be creative in different ways. Of course, for some people, this is going to look like maybe painting a blank wall feels therapeutic for them, whereas other people like to do really intricate drawings. For me, it looks like doodling either during like a church service while somebody's talking at a meeting, or like this gratitude practice I just had kind of explained. That helps me feel really relaxed and I actually pay better attention. But again, this looks different for everyone. For me, another way I like to be creative is through my garden. So gardening. I think gardening is an extremely creative hobby. I actually jotted down and like drew, oh my gosh, out all of my boxes, my grow boxes, and I drew photos of the different plants and sections that I was going to put in them, and that was just so fun. I also did that with my flower garden too, just so I could really like visually see what I was going to put there, and then I actually got to implement that by going out and planting those things. Again, you're going to find what works best for you. But number 4 then is a 20-second hug, which I think we could all agree we all could probably do. The thing with this is that you want it to be with somebody you feel safe and secure with. So this isn't just any Joe Blow on the street that you give a hug to, but somebody that makes you feel comfortable and safe. And this 20-second hug allows you to both kind of give, like similar to that progressive muscle relaxation practice, you're engaging those muscles, but you're also feeling secure and held by someone, and then you're able to relax. And again, I don't know if you've ever heard the 4 Hugs a Day song. If you have, it's probably now going to be stuck in your head. But really doing 4 20-second hugs a day can help so much with coping with stress and finding a way to feel comforted through it. Okay, so then when we think about the organs that are most affected by stress, that's going to be those adrenal glands, which if you've heard of my adrenal mocktail recipe, that is one to help support your body without using caffeine. But those adrenal glands sit right on top of your kidneys, and how they respond to stress is that through different nerve and hormonal signals, those adrenal glands are then prompted to release a surge of hormones. Typically, this is going to be adrenaline and cortisol, for example. So adrenaline increases your blood pressure and it gives you more energy, which at the beginning of the day, that's ideal. Before a workout or a game, that's ideal. But cortisol is one where you want that gradual energy spike in the morning, and then like I had mentioned before, you want it to decrease so that your body can actually produce melatonin at night. If cortisol is dysregulated, that's when your sleep schedule gets messed up. You notice that you have random cravings, or you maybe have like that addiction to blue light because your body's just like kind of addicted to that stress. Like it just wants that feedback. And so really we have to identify how we can help regulate cortisol, which is something I'm talking to these ladies about in the future weeks, because it's just a pretty big topic, and regulating cortisol is no easy task. It has a lot to do with that nervous system and your hormonal inflammation system. So the symptoms that can come with prolonged stress of those adrenal glands then is going to be you're feeling tired, weak, hard time falling asleep, or those sugary and salty cravings, or just that need for caffeine, right? It's mid-afternoon and you have no energy, you're hitting a slump and you think you need caffeine, when really you know, okay, that's going to also make it harder to fall asleep at night. Those physical symptoms that you'll notice would be around face, you're going to carry weight in your midsection, acne, or high blood pressure. What I want to dive a little bit more into here is those sugary and salty cravings, because this isn't a sign that you lack willpower. It's a sign that your body wants to be comforted, okay? And how this happens is it stimulates your body's reward system, so it leads you to feel less stressed because you're comforted. You feel safe and comfortable. You know, if we think about our favorite comfort foods, it's typically something very sweet, or like cookies or ice cream, or on the opposite end, it's something salty like chips. That's because your body wants to feel comforted. So again, you don't lack willpower and you're not failing your diet because you have a craving. That's a sign there's something more internal going on that we need to identify, which is most often due to stress and adrenal gland stress or fatigue. So this leads me to kind of the last part of this, which is recognizing what's depleting you. So some of these things are going to be non-negotiables. You can't avoid some of the responsibilities that you have. But out of the list that you write down or create, is there anything there that can give? Okay, so take a second to do that, or pause the episode if you're doing this practice in real time. And then on the opposite end, I want you to think about what energizes you and how can you add more of that into your lifestyle. This shouldn't be an extreme activity. Okay, so we can't go 0 to 100 right away. This might look like sitting down while drinking your morning coffee rather than drinking it on your drive to work. So it just means you factor in an extra 5 minutes in your morning routine just so you can have that moment of silence and relaxation before you head to school or head to work. Think of a very micro habit that you know would help energize you. Kind of wrapping this up, we're going to finish with the action plan. So this is your action plan for this week and beyond. Again, when I do these groups every week, we have a new action plan, but I would love for you to focus on these things and let me know how they go. The first one being to ask for help, which I know is not always easy to do, but identifying one person that you can ask for help from this week. So maybe that would look like picking your kids up from school, making supper for you, or taking over on a project at work. Number 2 is setting limits. So when can you log off for the day? When can you power down your phone, get off of email, get off of your computer? And be realistic with this, right? So like I've mentioned, you can't go 0 to 100 overnight. So what time are you going to log on and log off to social media, your email, text messages, accepting phone calls? And I want you to think of this very micro. So if you are somebody that works from, let's say 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., you might be like, oh yeah, that can't budge. That just has to be that way because I work 3 days a week. I can almost guarantee you could budge 10 minutes. All I'm asking, 10 to 15 minutes. So rather than leaving work at 7, you're going to leave work at 6:45. That gets you home by 7, hopefully. And again, it's just like creating that boundary where when you leave work or you leave your desk or you leave the classroom, that those things are you're logged off, right? So maybe it looks like spending more time there, but at the same time, not then letting that seep into your life outside of that, school, work, whatever it is for you. The last one is going to be recognizing when you're stressed. I think the number one reason that we don't actually do something about our stress is because we don't recognize our stress and handle it in real time. So I want you to recognize when you're stressed this week and don't ignore the symptoms that come from this. So making a note of when this occurs, who you're with, and how your body and your mind is physically reacting to this stress. All right. So that is all that I have for you today. I know it was kind of a deep dive into all of it, but valuable little takeaways from this. Again, if you implement that action plan for this week and you recognize a difference, please let me know, because I love formulating action plans, whether it's with clients or groups. Like, it is so fun to actually have something to focus on that's less overwhelming than thinking of the big picture and really breaks down what we've been talking about into more micro habits. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and close today's episode in prayer. So dear Lord, just thank you for today. Thank you for the change in seasons. And I just ask that we're all able to really appreciate them in these coming months as it gets warm. I ask that whatever stress is just hovering over whoever's listening to this episode's head, that they just feel a sense of relief, and that they're able to find time this week for themselves and for the people around them that they love so dearly. And that regardless of how acute or major that stress is, that they're able to really put focus on it and recognize it, and with your help work through it very, very gradually and with time. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so if you're interested in following along with my life outside of the podcast, you can find me at Nourish with Bailey on Instagram, Bailey Seaton on Facebook, YouTube. You can really find me anywhere. Otherwise, all of that will be linked in the description of today's episode, along with more information on one-on-one and group coaching options. And with that, I'll talk to you again next Wednesday. Bye.